Thanks for joining us today. I'm Josh Barnes, and this is the Point of View Spotlight on Fridays. And what an interview we have for you today. I'm so excited to introduce our next guest. Let's go straight to that interview. But before we do that, I want to remind you guys you can support the channel by and support the show. It's not just a channel. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on Facebook. You can find it on FISM TV streaming, and you can also find it on Right America Media Network and K-Star Conservative Radio Network. So we're all over the place, syndicated. Support Point of View and shows like this by going to whitemountainmunchies.com. Check it out there. Amazing, healthy, non-GMO, gluten-free snacks. Get a good discount on them by using the promo code RAM at checkout and support shows like Point of View. And also you can go to My Pillow, the amazing pillows, sheets. I mean, just they've got everything. And it's all an amazing product. You get a great discount by using the promo code RAM, and you support shows like this. Now, my guest today is a podcast speaker. He speaks at events. He's written tons of books, and he has so much insight that I couldn't even fit it all in one interview. We're going to have to reschedule and do some more. We had so much great conversation that didn't make it into this cut that we'll have to definitely reschedule and have him back again. Without further ado, here's our spotlight for this week. And I'm joined now by Jeff Dornik. Jeff is the author. He's an author. He's a podcast speaker. He's focuses on politics, but he's got two great books out there. From Gatekeepers Publishing, Social Injustice: Exposing the False Gospel of the Social Justice Movement, and Church and State: How the Left Used the Church to Conquer America. And Jeff, thank you so much for joining us on Point of View Spotlight today.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me. Been looking forward to hopping on here and glad we can sit down and chat here for a bit.
Yeah, such a privilege. What is sort of the focus of what you do? What's your main goal?
So I started out in general focus specifically when it comes to like theology, things that are going on within the church, exposing false teaching and things like that. And then slowly started getting involved in the political side of things as well, because I think that Christians in general need to be more active in the political sphere. I think for too long, conservatives have kind of been called out of that arena to a certain degree. And what it's done is it's allowed this void to be filled by the left. And so we're seeing right now the result of that right now with the leftist infiltration into the church. We're seeing that with organizations like the Southern Baptist Convention, the Gospel Coalition, organizations and groups like that, where they're blending biblical theology with leftist talking points that you would think are coming out of a Bernie Sanders rally or that you'd hear from like AOC, but they're blending it with biblical theology. So it sounds right. It sounds true. So my main focus right now is kind of twofold. One is dealing with confronting this within our churches, but then on the other side is exposing the truth within the political world and the secular world, because I think as Christians, we need to be shining light into darkness. And I think that for far too often Christians kind of avoid it because it's controversial. And I'm kind of like, no, we'll go there. I'll get in trouble. I don't really care. It's all good. So that's kind of my two-pronged approach right now.
Yeah, and it's important that you do know that you will get in trouble, because we will. That's all right. That's really the whole emphasis of Point of View, and this is why I think what you do is so intriguing to me, because here at Point of View, the whole point is looking at political issues from a biblical worldview, being unashamed to actually hold a worldview of Christianity when we hold the name of Christianity. And I think that's important. We actually did a show earlier this week on the subject of Christianity and politics. And a lot of people are sort of averse to that. Grandma used to say, you don't bring up religion, you don't bring up politics, and you certainly don't bring them up together. And what is your view on that? Is there sort of a biblical mandate for us to be a part of the political realm, or is there some validity to that argument that, you got to separate the two?
No, you cannot separate the two. The thing is that you have to be careful that you don't go so far into the politics that you forget the Christian side. But at the same time, again, Jesus himself said we're supposed to shine light into darkness. Where is darkness? Darkness is in the entertainment world, in Hollywood. Darkness is in the political world. And for whatever reason, in those two arenas, Christians are like, yeah, we're not going to be a part of that. That's too dark. It's like, well, I thought Jesus went to the prostitutes and tax collectors. He didn't avoid them. And I think for far too long, Christians are avoiding them. I mean, we even look at Jesus' earthly ministry, right? Jesus' earthly ministry was his entire, like the majority of his public spoken word was confronting and exposing the elites of his day. And a lot of people say, oh, it's just the religious leaders. He was focusing on a theological standpoint or the gospel or something like that. It's like, no, he focused on the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the scribes. They were both a combination of the religious leaders, but also the political leaders of his day. And again, this is one of those things that gets me in trouble a lot. But again, I don't really care. The same strategy that Jesus used throughout the Gospels. Go look at Matthew 23. He went to the people. He bypassed the system. He went straight to the people, talked to them, pointed back at all the elites and said, look at all these hypocrites and liars. Don't do what they say. Don't do as they do. And he exposed them. What do you think Donald Trump did? He bypassed the system, went straight to the people, pointed back at the frauds, at the swamp and all that kind of stuff and the elites and said, look at these guys. They're fake news. We need to drain the swamp. They're the deep state. They're a part of all this kind of stuff. I mean, Donald Trump kind of borrowed the same strategy that Jesus used. Jesus engaged in politics. He engaged in the local politics of his day. And I think that for far too long, we kind of whitewash Jesus' earthly ministry into a theological discussion and debate over the gospel. Yes, that was a major part of it. But also another major part was just exposing the fraud and the hypocrisy of the leaders of his day.
So here's something that some people might bring up, and I certainly agree with you. I don't want you to think I don't, but I want to have you interact with maybe some counter arguments. So some people would bring up the concept that, well, yeah, maybe Jesus did deal with the political issues of his day, but the political issues of his day were not the same as the issues that we face today. What would you say? Did he deal with things that we're dealing with, like racism? Did he deal with things like like abortion? Did he deal with the type of issues that we're dealing with?
I think the argument there is what they're trying to do is they're trying to find an out, right? And so I bring it back to the main point of Jesus focused on the relevant issues of his day, right? Today, we're not necessarily focusing on the ultra legalism that was in place in Israel at that time. We're dealing with different issues. Like you were saying, we're dealing with claims of systemic racism. We're dealing with abortion on a massive scale. We're dealing with the devaluing of human life, not even just preborn, but just human life in general. We're devaluing it. We're taking away people's constitutional rights, their freedoms, their liberties that we believe are given to us by God. That's what's relevant today. So to make the argument that, well, Jesus was focusing on these issues, those should only be the issues that we're focused on because they're not relevant today. We're not going to engage in the political sphere. I don't think that that's necessarily would be an honest argument. I think the honest argument would be Jesus focused on the relevant issues that were facing Israel at that time. He confronted it where the elite were taking advantage of people. We should be doing the same thing. Where are the elites taking advantage of people? They're taking away our constitutional rights. They're taking away our free speech. They're taking away our ability to peaceably assemble. They're taking away our ability to worship God as we see fit without restriction from the government. That's a key distinction that's in the Constitution of the United States. We're dealing with abortion. We're dealing with so many different things. We have to deal with what's relevant today. That's exactly what Jesus did.
So do you think that the church, in a church service, that this is the right place to deal with these sort of issues? Or should that just be spiritual issues,
No. So I think for far too long, a lot of pastors have kind of shied away from focusing on the political issues. I think that I don't think that necessarily a pastor needs to get up on a Sunday and talk about like whether taxes should be lowered by 1% or particular bills necessarily, but he should be teaching what's the ideology behind a lot of these moral stances that we're taking. What's the biblical teaching on freedom, on liberty? I mean, you go back and you look at the book of Exodus, right? What was the whole point of the book of Exodus? God took the Israel that was literally enslaved to Egypt and gave them freedom. Like at that point, they were probably the most free society in the world at that point once they finally got to Israel. The whole point was freedom and raising up the individual. You look throughout Exodus, Leviticus, all the laws, it was raising up the individual because of this premise that we are all created in the image of God. That's exactly what the founding fathers were doing with the founding of our country as well. I think that pastors, they need to engage in politics, but what they need to do is they need to teach the biblical principles behind the policies. That goes for abortion. That goes for these claims of systemic racism. The Bible talks about we are all one in Christ. Why are we trying to divide based on the color of your skin when in reality we need to understand we are all one. If you believe in Jesus Christ, it doesn't matter your background, it doesn't matter your gender, it doesn't matter the color of your skin, it doesn't matter your culture, it doesn't matter anything. All that matters is that we are now brothers and sisters in Christ. That's a key distinction. That breaks apart this entire critical race theory argumentation. That's the kind of stuff that pastors need to be preaching. They need to be preaching what's relevant, what's controversial, what do people need the answers for. I think right now it's so easy to go back to the sermons like, well, why God wants you to be a good person. I'm sorry. I think we all know that one.
Yeah. Right. And that's a really good point. A pastor or a preacher doesn't need to teach about, he doesn't need to tell people who to vote for if he's given people biblical principles, to evaluate candidates by. It should be pretty obvious who to vote for. It doesn't take a rocket scientist. So with that in mind, give us what are the biblical principles when we're dealing with issues like Black Lives Matter? That phrase seems correct, right? I mean, of course they matter. Of course the lives of people matter, right? But then the organization seems very incorrect. How do we apply biblical principles to issues like that?
Well, I think we have to break them down to what is actually being said, right? And so we have to also understand the way that the left works, the way that Democrats work, the way that Marxism works is what they do is they take principles and they take ideas that everybody would agree with, but then they redefine them. As an example of that, and then I'll bring it back to the Black Lives Matter thing. Within Christianity, within the Southern Baptist Convention, Gospel Coalition, a lot of those guys that I was mentioning before, one of the things that they're doing is they're preaching the gospel, right? They're saying here's the gospel, but they're redefining sin. Sin used to be, you break one of God's commands. It's reinterpreted today as dealing with oppression, right? So now the gospel is changed from Christ came down to earth to live a sinless, perfect life. He died on the cross to pay the penalty for our sins, which is us breaking God's commands. Okay. All of a sudden now Jesus came to earth to save you from being oppressed by others. That's a redefinition of the gospel, but they're using the exact same terminology, but with new definitions. It's the same thing when it comes to Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter to the masses, if you just say Black Lives Matter, it would mean, okay, we got to protect Black people from being shot by police officers. Well, let's look at the data. How many people in 2019 were actually unarmed Black, let's just say Black people in general? How many of them were unarmed and shot and killed by a police officer? 14, 13 men and one woman. Unarmed Black people that were shot by police officers. That's not a systemic, massive problem in a nation of 350 million people. I'm not downplaying what actually happened because every single life that is taken is horrific, whether it's justified or not. I don't want to see anybody die. But at the same time, we have to deal with reality. You look at their platform on the Black Lives Matter website before they deleted it after a lot of Christians exposed it. You look at the platform. The entire platform was about destroying our country and rebuilding it in their socialist Marxist agenda. It was taking away the infrastructure of the family. It was taking away everything moral that we believe. It's taking away God from society. That was their agenda. That was their plan. They're using it under this guise of we have to stop Black people from being mowed down in the streets by police officers. But in reality, it was all about destroying society and rebuilding it up. So as a pastor, pastors need to be preaching about this in Sunday because a lot of people are being fooled by a lot of this ideology and false teaching and redefinitions, and people are just following right along. I mean, I'm dealing with this in our church too. Our church is starting to embrace a lot of this kind of Black Lives Matter kind of theology, and it's a difficult situation because you have to bring it back to the definitions. You have to get people to define their words because words have no meaning anymore. It could mean one of a million different things. That's something that pastors really need to confront right now.
Yeah, and one of the things we've also been talking about this week on Point of View is the link between Black Lives Matter and Hamas. Black Lives Matter has now come out in full support of Hamas, which is arguably, and I think rightfully so, the most racist organization in the world. I mean, they want to completely exterminate the Jewish people. And here's Black Lives Matter that claims to be against racism, and they're promoting the most racist, organization anywhere. And so, kind of segueing from that conversation about Black Lives Matter, what is your take on what's going on in Israel? How Christians should respond to that, and really, is there really any room at all for us to, support Hamas? I mean, that just seems very foreign to the Christian worldview.
I mean, supporting Hamas is like supporting Nazi Germany. I mean, they have the same agenda. Their agenda is to wipe Israel and wipe the Jewish people off the face of the earth. I don't know how you logically can rationally come to a conclusion that, yeah, you know what, Hamas, they're kind of like some bad guys. There's some terrorists, right? They want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, but I'm going to support those guys over Israel, who's literally just defending themselves. And again, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Israel as a political system and a government is perfect, because I'm sure they've made mistakes. I'm sure they've done something that has caused harm to Palestinians at some point, somewhere, whatever it is. I don't want to downplay that at all. But at the same time, when you look, who are the ones that are initiating each one of these fights? Who are the ones that are shooting missiles at the other one? You see, Israel, they'll be strategic. They'll go after particular places of terrorist cells that are hiding in schools. They're hiding in hospitals. The crazy thing is, Israel literally, they will give everybody a heads up. Hey guys, we're going to bomb this building because a terrorist organization, Hamas, is hiding out here. So we're going to bomb it. Guys, get out. If you guys don't want to die, get out. Do you think Hamas does that to Israel? Hamas isn't giving the Jewish people a heads up like, hey guys, we're going to bomb this building. They just do it. They've got suicide bombers that will go in. They're stabbing. Like, it's insane. It's crazy. And the fact that people are buying into this leftist narrative, and a lot of this comes back to this anti-colonialism sentiment among the left. They hate America. So because they see America as being colonial, they see Israel as being colonial, because the United Nations, I believe, was with the Rothschilds and all that kind of stuff. They came in and they established Israel back here, and it kind of created this animosity and this colonial attitude going on in the Middle East. And so that's why I think a lot of people, a lot of Democrats and a lot of people on the left are supporting the Palestinians over Israel, is because in the Middle East, Israel represents the United States of America. And in the leftist mind, United States of America, they're the oppressors, they're the evil, they're racist, they need to be destroyed. And they see Israel as an extension of us. And again, as Christians and just conservatives in general, we need to be exposing this ideology and explaining, hey guys, you guys cannot support terrorist organizations. Israel is like the last and only beacon of freedom in the Middle East. They're the only place. They're not throwing gay people off the top of buildings. They allow women to drive. They allow women to vote. They have more rights than any other country over there. But all of a sudden, you're supporting the actual dictators, the actual terrorists. It's just utter insanity.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think is, one of the things that we really push hard on Point of View is we really want to encourage people to just approach issues with just, a little bit of critical thinking skills. Stop, listen to both sides of the argument, consider this, and instead of just jumping to conclusions. I think personally, I think that could take us a long way towards, if Christians would use critical thinking skills, Christians becoming actual, Christians in their worldview and in their viewpoints. I think it would help a lot. So what are some things that you think, could help with this insanity that we're seeing in our world today, where people are just adopting philosophies and views that just aren't consistent at all, just seem completely insane, and specifically calling themselves Christians and holding views that are opposite from Christianity?
I think number one, and this is one of the things that I keep hammering home, and I'm kind of like beating a dead horse with this one, but I have to keep going. We'll beat the dead horse. I think what we have to understand that what is happening today, and the reason why we're seeing this drift that's happening, is people are choosing and identifying with their favorite celebrity, their favorite politician, their favorite pastor. And then after they it's like they're picking their team first, and then they're changing their ideology to fit with that team. And we saw this with Trump, We see this with the Democrats. I mean, look at how far the Democrats have progressed left in the last 4 years. Like, I'm talking to some of the same people that used to be very moderate, whatever it is, and all of a sudden now they're full on embracing Marxism and socialism. And I'm like, how did this happen in 4 years? Well, what ended up happening is they related to people like Bernie Sanders. They related to people like AOC. And because they support that person, they begin to adopt the things that they're saying because they support that person. The same kind of thing happened with Trump. And again, I'm a Trump supporter. I was a Trump supporter since 2012. I wanted him to run back in 2012. But the thing, I also understand there's this kind of cult worship among certain fringe segments of the MAGA movement, where you had people that, it's like Donald Trump was never actually a conservative. He governed the most conservative we've had, but he's kind of a moderate, somewhat progressive socially, things like that. You're seeing a lot of people that used to oppose some of the things that he's done. All of a sudden now they're embracing it because they identify with Trump. Thus, they have to support everything he says and does. So, like you were saying, bringing it back to critical thinking, we have to, I think, as Christians and as conservatives, we have to begin to separate our ideology from the politicians and our ideology from these celebrity faces, right? We have to figure out, what do we believe first? And then we support the candidates that support what we believe, not the other way around. I think for far too long, we're dealing with the person as opposed to the ideology. One example of this is, I've been able to go on lefty shows and convince them that the most compassionate thing that we can do for illegal immigrants is build the wall. And that's because we have to take the power away from the cartels who are using and abusing these illegal immigrants. They're taking, I think right now, people are having to pay like anywhere from $10,000 to $25,000 for these coyotes to smuggle them across the border, in which they're oftentimes sexually abused, they're trafficked, they're smuggling drugs across the border, all this kind of stuff. It's crazy. But the reality of it is, if you want to protect these illegal immigrants, the best thing you can do is shut down illegal immigration, which takes the power away from the cartels. I got guys that self-proclaimed said that they're so far left, Bernie Sanders looks like the Tea Party. I got them to actually agree that, yeah, you know what, that actually makes sense. Let's take the power away from the cartels. But then my mistake was that I brought up Trump and the wall, and I used that as a point to support Trump and the wall. And all of a sudden they're like, well, that's racist. Why? Because it's Donald Trump. So if we can take the personalities out of it and make it about the issue, I think we could actually begin to gain some headway. Right now, the problem is that conservatives, we've identified so much with Donald Trump that the people on the other side will not hear what we have to say. We can make the most logical argument, but they will reject it because we're tied to Trump. We have to make it about the issues, not about the personalities.
You think it really is Trump, though? I mean, I know Trump perhaps made it worse. I mean, I suppose the things that he said, were often inflammatory, but I mean, it feels like this is just a magnification of what was already taking place. They already didn't want to listen to us. They already thought that all conservatives were racist. This was it was maybe magnified under Trump, but it doesn't feel that different to me.
I think the problem that we're having right now is we're seeing a media manipulation of the masses, right? And so especially during the Donald Trump presidency, they made it to where it wasn't just about Trump. So like when it was dealing with George Bush when he was president, it was about George Bush. They ridiculed him, but they didn't like. Yeah, sure. They'd make fun of conservatives. They'd call us hick. They'd say that, yeah, oh, we're just a bunch of country people. We don't understand politics or the system or whatever it is. And that was kind of the extent of the attack on us. Under Trump, we're seeing claims of racism. We're seeing claims that we're all just a bunch of Nazis. After January 6th, we're seeing that we're a bunch of domestic terrorists, violent extremists, all that kind of stuff. I don't think that's Trump's fault. That's not a negative on Trump himself, because I think what he did is he exposed the fraud for a lot of people. I can't tell you how many people that I know, they voted for the first time in this election for Donald Trump because he opened their eyes. And so many Democrats left the Democrat Party and came over. What I'm talking about, though, is the media manipulation of the people, of people that are still watching mainstream news. And those people that are watching it, they're so triggered by Donald Trump. They've lost their ability to critically think. They've lost their ability to use logic and reason. They just hear Trump and their wall goes up. It's almost like there's this spiritual blindness that's in our country right now that we're going to have to figure out how to combat that. I think that it comes down to not allowing them to raise their walls. And again, it's not a knock on Trump. I'm still a Trump supporter. But the reality of it is, if we can get to them with the issues, have them accept the premise of the issues, and then allow them to come to their own conclusions, I think a lot of them will actually get red pilled. I think a lot of them will actually realize, oh, that aligns with Trump. That does not align with the Democrat Party, and allow God to kind of work through their lives and open their eyes through that way. So it's just kind of a slightly different strategy that I take on that one.
Well, that's great. I mean, we could continue this conversation, and maybe we will be able to do so on another day. I know we're running out of time here. Before we go, though, I wanted to give you a chance to promote the books that you've put out there. These look like amazing books, just some amazing co-authors. You got Michael Brown, Pastor Greg Locke, on how the left used the church to conquer America. That's your book, Church and State. And then Social Injustice, exposing the false gospel of the social justice movement. Tell the viewers why they should buy the book, what they expect to find in it, and where they can find it and purchase it online.
Yeah, so both these books, my first jump into the publishing world, they both came out last year, and they're both group book projects. And so the first one was really confronting the social justice movement and how it's really been infiltrating into the church. And I brought together a bunch of contributing authors like Brandon House from over at Worldview Weekend. He's working on Frank's speech and a lot of stuff with Mike Lindell and all that kind of stuff. Dr. Andy Woods, who is awesome. He talked about how a false eschatology can actually lead to belief in social justice. A really fascinating chapter. But in that book specifically, we really confronted the theology and the ideology behind this cultural Marxism that's been infiltrating in. And I gotta say, this has been an intentional push by the left to get into our churches, to get into our seminaries and all that kind of stuff. And so that's really focusing on the ideology. Our second book, Church and State, How the Left Used the Church to Conquer America, that's really focusing on the strategy of the left and how they infiltrated into the churches. So that, like with that book, we had, like you said, like Dr. Brown, Greg Locke did an amazing job. We had Denise McAllister, who's a former writer for the Daily Wire. She focused on the attack on sexual identity. We had Dr. Bobby Lopez, who focused on the seminaries and how the left has really infiltrated even the conservative seminaries. And so, which again, that's where they influence the pastors. That's how so many churches are being compromised. So you can get both these books over at gatekeepersonline.com. You guys can actually use code Jeff at checkout if you want for 10% off. And we actually have a bundle pack where you guys can save even more. So definitely check those out. But it's a great resource. I was honored to be able to put it together, but the lineup of authors was epic, and the content in there is just very in depth, but it's very readable to where you could sit down and it's very easy to grasp and understand.
That's great. Thank you. Wish we had more time to talk more. We'll definitely have you back on some other time. Thank you so much, Jeff Dornik.
Thank you.
And a jam-packed spotlight half hour. Thanks for joining us here on Point of View. If you're watching today, we're praying for you. I'm serious. We're praying that God will work in your life, that you will trust and believe Jesus Christ, that you will know and believe the gospel, repent of your sin, and place your faith and trust in Him, that you will be right about issues. To be right about issues, you're going to have to be biblical about issues, and Point of View is here to help you do that. So tell your friends, tell your family, tell everyone you know about Point of View, and we'll see you next time right here on Monday.